Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Harmeet Singh, consultant and head of accident and emergency at Max Vishali, and I am also the organizing chairman of this trauma series that is going to be run throughout these 2 months, November and December 2021. On behalf of Medical Crib, World Emergency Care Academy, and Emergency Department of Max Vishali, I welcome you all for joining this session. And today's faculty is Dr. Tanmay Kumar Jha, who is Senior Medical Officer at Max Vishali in my team. He is going to lecture on head injury. So, what is head injury? How to deal pre-hospital and how to deal in hospital. So, he is going to explain each and everything. And please drop your questions in the Dropbox, and we will definitely answer and will get back to you. Thank you, NC, for organizing such a great event. And today is the second lecture. The first lecture was given by me myself, Dr. Harmeet, and this that was introduction to the trauma series and the epidemiology and others. If you have missed that lecture, you can go to the link of the YouTube of Medical Crib, and you can join there. You can see there. Okay, you can watch that lecture. Rest of the information will be given on the WhatsApp group by Miss Ansi, who is the organizing secretary of this trauma series. Thank you so much, and once again I welcome you and all the best. Be with us today and be there on next Wednesday, where we will come with another topic. Thank you so much.
Warm welcome to all of you in this trauma management series. I'm Dr. Tanya from the Department of Emergency Medicine, Max Hospital, Vaishali. It will be a long series where we will be discussing various types of injuries. And like a good opening batsman, I'll very patiently start this series in a test match. I'll discuss everything very patiently, and hopefully, we'll all have learned something by the end of the day. So, traumatic brain injury. So, what is traumatic brain injury? Traumatic brain injury is defined as brain function impairment that results from external forces. Clinical manifestations represent a broad constellation of symptoms like nausea, vomiting, headache, to patient being comatose or even death. It is defined as mild, moderate, or severe based on Glasgow Coma Scale. Mild brain injuries have GCS score of 13 to 15. Uh, they account for approximately 10% of head injuries. Mortality rates in patients with isolated mild traumatic brain injuries is quite less, and it is often called concussion. The level of the this label of mild traumatic brain injury is a misnomer. However, since no brain injury can be called mild as per se, moderate traumatic brain injuries have GCS score of 9 to 13 and account for approximately 10% of head injuries. Mortality rates in these patients with isolated moderate traumatic brain injuries is less than 20%, but long-term disability can be higher. 40% of these patients may have an abnormal finding on CT scan, and 8% will require a neurosurgical intervention. In severe traumatic brain injuries with GCS score of 3 to 8, mortality rate approaches 40%, and less than 10% of these patients have full neurological recovery. The prevalence of traumatic brain injury is twice as high in males than in females. Distribution of age in these patients is trimodal, with most cases occurring in children, young adults, and elderly patients. The cause of severe traumatic brain injury is most often motor vehicle collisions in young adults and children, and most of the cases in elderly are because of falls. A good understanding of anatomy is quite essential to understand the pathophysiology of traumatic brain injury. The first layer is scalp, which is a layer which has a very good vascular supply. So extensive bleeding can occur, and it can result in major blood loss. The base of skull and the surface is irregular, so acceleration of the brain or its deceleration might cause injury of the brain against these skull surfaces. The next layer is the meningeal layer, which has three layers: dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. The space between the cranium and the dura mater is called epidural space, and the hemorrhages in these spaces are called extradural hemorrhages. A potential space between dura mater and arachnoid mater is the subdural space. Hemorrhage in these are called subdural hemorrhages. The next layer is arachnoid matter, and the space between arachnoid and pia mater is filled with CSF. Hemorrhages in these spaces are called subarachnoid hemorrhages. ICP elevation can reduce cerebral perfusion pressure, which can cause or exacerbate ischemia. Elevations in ICP are life-threatening and may lead to a phenomenon known as the Cushing reflex, which is hypertension, bradycardia, and irregular respiration. The hypertension in these cases is an attempt to increase the CPP. As we know, CPP, the cerebral perfusion pressure, is mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. So the body is trying to increase the mean arterial pressure. That's why Cushing reflex occurs. Next vital concept is the Monro-Kelly doctrine. It explains intracranial pressure dynamics. The cranium is an enclosed space with a fixed volume. There are three intracranial compartments: brain parenchyma, CSF, and intravascular blood. When one compartment expands, there is a compensatory reduction in the volume of another, and baseline ICP thus increases. In brain injury, this autoregulation is often impaired, so even modest drops in VP can decrease cerebral perfusion. The brain tries to compensate the increase in intracranial pressure by reducing CSF and the venous volume. But at the point of decompensation, suddenly the ICP starts to increase rapidly. It almost becomes vertical. In brain injury, the autoregulation is often impaired, so a modest drop in BP can decrease cerebral perfusion. As discussed, the cerebral perfusion pressure was mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. So, if mean arterial pressure drops and ICP is already increased, the cerebral perfusion declines. Based on morphology, again, traumatic brain injuries can be classified as skull fractures or intracranial lesion. Baseless skull fractures are associated with tearing of dura mater. There is a potential risk of leakage of CSF. Autoria or rhinodia can occur. Raccoon eyes, that is periorbital ecchymosis, or the mustard ecchymosis, which is known as battle sign, might occur. There might be deafness or seven nerve palsy also. Focal intracranial lesions can be epidural, which is the space between skull and the dura mater. These are usually caused by the tearing of middle meningeal arteries, so extensive bleeding can occur. These hemorrhages are critical. The classical history is of a blunt head injury followed by loss of consciousness. Then there is a interval known as lucid interval in which the patient becomes normal, and then again a neurological deterioration occurs. The Classical shape that we get on a CT scan is a biconvex mass, that is a football shaped mass. You can see here in the left sided image with the arrow. This is a football shaped or biconvex mass. This is epidural hemorrhage. Subdural hemorrhages occur between dura mater and arachnoid mater. These are usually caused by tearing of veins. So the accumulation of blood is slower than arterial bleeding that occurs in epidural hemorrhages. Brains with extensive atrophy, such as elderly or in chronic alcoholics, are more susceptible to these kind of hemorrhages. Acute symptoms usually develop within 2 weeks. Hemorrhages which are more than 2 weeks are known as chronic SDS. Another type of diffuse injury is diffuse axonal injury. These are disruption of axonal fibers in white matter and brainstem. CT scan may appear normal and may be missed by an untrained eye. Treatment options in these cases are limited, and you can just decrease chances of secondary brain injury. The image in the right is a subdural hemorrhage. You can notice the concave shape compared to the convex shaped in epidural hemorrhages. Epidural hemorrhages have a convex shaped mass, while subdural have a concave shaped mass. You can see in the bottom left image also subdural hematoma. Again, you can notice it in the right image. There is a small subdural hematoma in right frontotemporal region. It is concave in shape, while the image in the left has a epidural hematoma. Notice the biconvex shape. The primary goal of treatment is to prevent secondary brain injury in all cases. So, what treatment that we can do in pre-hospital settings is to manage ABCD. You have to stabilize C-spine if indicated and avoid hyperventilation in these cases. So, how are brain injuries managed? So, minor traumatic brain injuries, in all cases of minor traumatic brain injuries, you have to take a brief history, including name, age, sex, occupation, history of mechanism of injury, time of injury, loss of consciousness, immediately post injury occurred or not, subsequent level of alertness, amnesia, whether retrograde or antegrade, headache, vomiting should be taken. General examination to exclude other systemic causes should be done. A limited neurological examination should be done. Cervical spine imaging should be done if indicated. You can use either the Nexus or the Canadian C-spine criteria, which we'll discuss later. Blood or urine toxicology should be sent if required. CT scan of the head should be done if indicated in mild traumatic brain injuries. In all other cases of moderate traumatic brain injury or severe traumatic brain injury, that is a GCS score of less than 13, you have to get a CT scan done. So in these cases, you can either use the New Orleans criteria or the Canadian city rule. Admission or transfer to a appropriate facility should be done in minor traumatic brain injury if there is no city available at your center. There is some abnormal finding on CT scan. There is a history of prolonged loss of consciousness. There is a severe headache. There is a significant intoxication. There is a skull fracture, CSF leak, significant other associated injuries. There is no reliable companion at home. There's abnormal GCS, that is a GCS less than 15, persistent focal neurological deficit is present. Discharge if admission criteria are not met. With a warning sheet, uh, you have to tell the patient and his or her attendant to get the patient back to the emergency if there's some drowsiness, nausea, vomiting, seizures, bleeding, or watery discharge from ear or nose. This is the New Orleans criteria or the Canadian city head rule for decision regarding whether you should get a CT done or not in minor traumatic brain injury, that is GCS of less than 13 to 15. Some common criteria, and these are elderly patients, in history of intoxication, there is history of amnesia, headache, vomiting, signs of basilar skull fracture, open or depressed skull fracture, scissors. So these both of these criteria, and if any of the criteria are present, you have to get a CT scan done. Both of these criteria are quite sensitive in predicting a need for neurosurgical intervention. Both of them are 100% sensitive for the need for neurosurgical intervention. Canadian cervical spine rule for radiography is to assess whether the patient needs imaging of the cervical spine. So you have to ask three questions: if there are any high risk factors that require the patient's cervical spine to be radiographed, whether you can allow, whether you can test assessment of range of motion of the cervical spine, whether the patient is able to rotate his or her neck regardless of the pain. So, if any of these criteria are present, you have to get an imaging of cervical spine. Nexus criteria is National Emergency X Radiography Utilization Study, where there you have to ask if there is presence of midline cervical tenderness, whether there is presence of focal neurological deficit, whether there is normal level of alertness, that is GCS of 15, there is no evidence of intoxication, there is absence of a painful distracting injury. So if any of these criteria are present, you have to get a image of the cervical spine. So if you can't clear patient cervical spine using any of the criteria, you have to perform a cervical spine immobilization. Do not remove the cervical collar if you can't rule out a cervical spine injury before imaging it. In moderate traumatic brain injury, that is a GCS score of 9 to 13, you have to perform the same management principles as mild head injuries, but you have to get a CT scan done in all these cases. You have to admit all these patients or transfer to an appropriate neurosurgical facility. Do not hold the patient in your hospital if you do not have neurosurgical care just to get a CT scan of the patient. Transfer the patient as soon as possible. You have to perform frequent neurological examination of the patients, at least in the first 12 to 24 hours, and you have to plan a repeat CT scan of the patient within 24 hours and get a CT scan done if there's sudden drop in patient's consciousness, or you have to manage, or if there is some abnormal finding on the CT scan. Severe traumatic brain injury. In severe traumatic brain injury, the GCS score is between 3 to 8. The minimum GCS is 3, uh, and the maximum score in these patients is 8. So these patients are comatose, and you have to manage patient's airway. If the patient's GCS is so poor, you have to manage the patient's airway first. Airway, breathing, circulation disability should be managed first. The same management principles are followed in these cases also. You have to perform cervical spine immobilization as indicated. Perform primary survey and resuscitation. Perform secondary survey. Admit the patient. Therapeutic agents here use a mannitol to lower ICP, hypertonic saline again to lower ICP. This is usual, particularly in patients who are hypotensive. And you have to get a CT scan in all these cases. So, what do we do in primary survey and resuscitation? So, in primary survey, what do we do? The first important thing is to manage the patient's airway. Brain injury is often adversely affected by secondary insults. The mortality rate for patients with severe brain injury who have hypotension on admission is more than double than of patients who do not have hypotension. The presence of hypoxia in addition to hypotension is associated with an increase in the relative risk of mortality by 75%. Transient respiratory arrest and hypoxia are common with severe brain injury and can cause secondary brain injury. Perform early endotracheal intubation in all comatose patients. Ventilate the patient with 100% oxygen until blood gas measurements are available. Uh, Saturation probe is a useful adjunct. Try to maintain SpO2 of more than 98%. Set ventilation parameters such that the PaCO2 is around 35 mmHg. Reserve hyperventilation acutely in those patients with suspected impending herniation with acute neurological deterioration. Prolonged hyperventilation with PCO2 of less than 25 mmHg is not recommended. Hypotension is usually not due to the brain injury itself. Remember, an intracranial hemorrhage will not cause hypotension or hemorrhagic shock. If the patient is hypotensive, establish euvolemia as soon as possible using blood products or isotonic fluids. Uh, Hypotension can occur in head injury because of cervical spine injury or in cases where medullary herniation is imminent or has happened. Neurological examination of hypotensive patient is unreliable. Hypotensive patients might recover neurologically just by administration of isotonic fluids and blood products uh, when you raise the mean arterial pressure of the patient so that the cerebral perfusion pressure might improve. Target a systolic blood pressure of more than 100 mmHg in all head injuries. Perform a rapid focused neurological examination, determine patient GCS, lateralizing signs, or other focal neurological deficit. Testing for Doll's eye, caloric tests, or corneal reflexes is deferred to a neurosurgeon. It is important to perform a brief neurological examination before sedating and ventilating the patient. Try and use short-acting sedatives. Anesthetic analgesic agents should be used very cautiously as overuse might cause a progression of serious brain injury, impair patient's respiration, or result in unnecessary intubation or mechanical ventilation. Perform serial examinations, GCS score, lateralizing signs, and pupillary reaction to detect neurological deterioration as early as possible. Early sign of temporal lobe herniation is dilation of pupil and loss of pupillary response to light. CT scan should be done as soon as possible after hemodynamic stabilization. It should be repeated whenever there is a change in patient's clinical status. It should be repeated within 24 hours of injury for patients receiving anticoagulation, patients older than 65 years, and who have ICH volume more than 10 ml. Shift of 5 mm or greater of midline structures due to mass effect indicates the need for surgery to evacuate the blood clot. MRI can detect subtle lesions missed by CT, however, it can't be performed in an unstable patient and may not be available. Medical therapies, what we have are intravenous fluids, use isotonic fluids like normal saline or Ringer's lactate. To resuscitate the patient and to maintain high euvolemia, administer isotonic fluids, blood and blood products. Glucose-containing fluids might cause hyperglycemia, which can harm an injured brain. Correction of anticoagulation should be done in patients who are receiving anticoagulants or antiplatelets. If patient is receiving an antiplatelet such as aspirin or clopidogrel, you have to administer platelets. In patients receiving warfarin, you have to administer vitamin K. In patients who are receiving heparin, you have to administer protamine. Mannitol, most common preparation of mannitol is a 20% solution. Giving mannitol in patients does not lower ICP who already have hypotension, and it can cause hypotension by itself as it is a potent osmotic diuretic. Hyperventilation can result in ischemia in an already injured brain as it reduces PaCO2 and can cause cerebral vasoconstriction and thus impair cerebral perfusion. Whether hypoventilating the patient causes hypercarbia, which will cause cerebral vasodilation and increase in ICP. Hypertonic saline is reserved for patients who already have hypotension, and it is not a osmotic diuretic, so it might be useful in those patients to lower ICP. It is available from in various forms from 3% to 23% hypertonic saline. Barbiturates or anticonvulsants have to be used very carefully in all patients who have head injury because these might interfere with brain recovery. Anticonvulsants are not useful in preventing late onset seizures and can be used in acute cases. Antiplatelets, you have to administer platelets, warfarin, again vitamin K, heparin, you have to give protamine sulfates, low molecular weight heparin, again protamine. Surgical management for scalp wounds, scalp wounds can bleed extensively because these are very vascular. You have to you have to examine the wound, perform aseptic precautions, and ligate or compress the bleeding vessel. Depressed skull fractures, all depressed skull fractures mandate a CT. Um, these should be managed by a neurosurgeon. Uh, Intracranial mass lesions should be managed by a neurosurgeon or transferred to a neurosurgical center. Emergency craniotomy may be required in these cases. Penetrating brain injuries, CT scanning of the head is strongly recommended. Prophylactic broad spectrum antibiotics should be administered. Again, early neurosurgical reference or transfer is required. In patients who need an evacuation, bone flap craniotomy is the treatment of choice versus a simple burr hole. So again, what is need to be emphasized is that in all cases of brain injury, you have to manage A, B, C, D, E, perform cervical spine immobilization, and uh, maintain a euvolemia. Do not hyperventilate the patient. Do not hypoventilate the patient. Maintain a strict blood sugar. Do not give glucose containing fluids, as hyperglycemia might again cause secondary brain insults. Uh, so for the preparation of this PowerPoint, I have used ninth edition of Tintinari's Emergency Medicine and 10th edition of the new ATLS. And then I'd like to thank you all for your patient listening. Thank you.